One man, a short flight on a rainy day, a calm voice, a mysterious note, and a plan no one saw coming. What happened next would puzzle the FBI, shock the nation, and leave behind a mystery that's still unsolved today. This is the story of a man we still call D.B. Cooper. November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, one of the busiest travel days in the US airports. At Portland International Airport, a man bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He paid $20 in cash, no ID required. The name on the ticket was Dan Cooper. He looked ordinary, mid-40s, raincoat, dark suit, black tie, sunglasses. Carrying a briefcase, he blended in easily. Flight 305 was a short 30-minute trip. On board were 36 passengers and 6 crew members, including flight attendants Tina McClough and Florence Schaffner. Cooper took a seat near the back, ordered a bourbon and soda, and waited quietly. Around 3 p.m., he handed Florence a note. She slipped it into her pocket, thinking it was someone's phone number. Calmly, Cooper leaned in and said, "Miss, you should read that note." She opened it. The message, written in neat block letters, said something like, "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit beside me." Staying calm, Florence sat next to him. Cooper opened the briefcase slightly, showing red cylinders, wires, and a battery. It looked real. He stayed polite, sipping his drink as if nothing unusual was happening. He quietly listed his demands. $200,000 in cash by the time they landed, 4 parachutes, and the fuel truck ready in Seattle. Florence walked to the cockpit to inform the captain. In that moment, Flight 305 went from a routine trip to the center of one of the most famous unsolved hijackings in history. As the crew learned about the hijackers' demands, air traffic control was alerted, and the FBI quickly took charge of the response. The primary goal was the safety of the passengers, and officials advised full cooperation. Inside the cabin, Dan Cooper remained calm throughout the flight. He ordered a bourbon and soda, smoked cigarettes, common on flights in 1971, and spoke in a polite, steady voice. According to later interviews with flight attendant Tina McClough, Cooper showed no sign of panic or aggression, and at one point even offered to pay for his drink. On the ground, the FBI prepared the requested ransom of $200,000 in used $20 bills and 4 parachutes, including civilian and military models. Upon landing at Seattle-Tacoma Airport around 5:40 p.m., the crew parked the aircraft away from the terminal, as Cooper instructed. The delivery of money and parachutes was carried out discreetly, and shortly after, the passengers and 2 flight attendants were released. Cooper then gave his next orders, refueled the plane, and set course for Mexico City. The refueling process, delayed by what the ground crew reported as a fuel vapor lock, bought authorities time, though no direct intervention was attempted. At 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 lifted off once again, heading south. Only 5 people remained on board: the cockpit crew, flight attendant Tina McClough, and the man known as Dan Cooper, seated at rear with the ransom money and parachutes. Throughout the flight, Cooper remained composed. Shortly after 8 p.m., a light on the cockpit panel signaled that the rear air stair had been deployed. The pilots felt a sudden shift in cabin pressure and a slight upward tilt in the aircraft's nose, consistent with weight leaving the rear of the plane. No one saw Cooper jump. There was no signal or farewell. The crew's only indication was the mechanical signs in the cockpit. At approximately 10:15 p.m., the plane landed at Reno Tahoe International Airport. FBI agents, police, and bomb specialists surrounded the aircraft. On board, they found no sign of Cooper. The only traces left behind were his black clip-on tie, 8 cigarette butts, and 1 unused parachute. Notably absent were the briefcase and the $200,000 in cash. The weather over southwestern Washington that night was brutal. Freezing rain, gustling winds over 100 miles per hour, and rugged forested terrain below. For most experts, the odds of surviving such a jump were low. When Flight 305 landed safely in Reno, and the crew confirmed that Cooper was gone, the largest manhunt in US aviation history was launched. The FBI, local police, state troopers, and military units all joined the search. But from the start, they faced a major challenge. No one knew exactly where or when Cooper had jumped. The flight path passed over dense forests, rivers, and mountains in southern Washington and northern Oregon. With stormy weather and limited radar tracking, the suspected drop zone covered tens of thousands of acres, much of it remote and rugged. Search teams were sent into the wilderness, combing through forests and riverbanks by foot, helicopter, and boat. Planes flew over the suspected area, and divers explored riverbeds. Yet, despite weeks of effort, no parachute, no body, no trace of money were found. On board the plane, FBI agents carefully collected evidence. Cooper's black clip-on tie, his cigarette butts, and several fingerprints were gathered and tested, but none led to a match. Even the note Cooper had given to the flight attendant was missing. He had taken it back before leaving. In the early days of media coverage, the FBI announced that the hijacker had boarded under the name Dan Cooper. But due to a miscommunication between reporters and agents, the name was mistakenly reported as D.B. Cooper, and it stuck. From then on, the unknown hijacker was known across America and later the world as D.B. Cooper. The FBI conducted hundreds of interviews with passengers, crew members, airport staff, and anyone who might have crossed paths with Cooper. Composite sketches were created, showing a middle-aged man with a receding hairline, wearing sunglasses and a calm expression. Investigators explored dozens of leads, including skydivers, military veterans, and people with aviation or explosives experience. Yet every trail seemed to end in a dead end. For the FBI, one possibility was clear. If Cooper hadn't survived the jump, his body and the money should eventually surface. But as time passed, neither did. As weeks turned into months, the case cooled, but in the public imagination, Cooper became more than a suspect. He became a legend. Interestingly, when police first traced the name Dan Cooper from the airline ticket, they located a man by that name. But it turned out to be a coincidence. This Dan Cooper lived far away and had no connection to the hijacking, and investigators quickly ruled him out. At that time, passengers could buy a ticket without showing ID, so many believed the hijacker simply chose the name at random. Then, nearly a decade later, a surprising discovery reignited the case. In February 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand along the Columbia River near Tennessee Bar, just outside Vancouver, Washington. He uncovered 3 bundles of old, decaying $20 bills held together by rubber bands. The bills were quickly turned over to the authorities. When tested, the serial numbers matched the ransom money handed to Cooper in 1971. In total, $5,800 was recovered, only a small fraction of the $200,000 he had taken. This discovery raised more questions than answers. Why were the bills buried under sand, far from the estimated jump area? Why was only a small portion of money recovered? And how had the bills remained hidden for so long without any noticing? Some investigators believe the discovery proved Cooper hadn't survived the jump. Perhaps he crashed into the river and part of the money floated downstream. Others suspected the money had been planted intentionally, either by Cooper to throw off investigators or by someone who had found it later and panicked. Forensic testing revealed that the cash had been buried for several years, but no one could determine exactly when. More importantly, no other ransom bills ever appeared in circulation. Decades after the hijacking, the mystery of D.B. Cooper remains one of America's most famous unsolved cases. To some, Cooper became a symbol of rebellion, a man who challenged the system without hurting anyone. His legend grew far beyond the details of the case, inspiring books, songs, movies, and even TV shows like Prison Break and Loki. But the hijacking also changed aviation forever. Before 1971, air travel was simple. No metal detectors, no baggage screening, and often no ID checks. After Cooper's escape, security rules tightened. By 1973, metal detectors were required at US airports, and Boeing modified the 727's rear staircase with a device nicknamed the Cooper Vane, designed to prevent it from opening during flight. Despite the serious security lessons, public fascination with Cooper only deepened over the years. In the Pacific Northwest, some bars hold annual Cooper Day celebrations, complete with parachute contests. Amateur investigators continue searching the wilderness, looking for clues or the missing money. Finally, in July 2016, after 45 years, the FBI announced it was closing the case, officially ending one of the longest-running investigations in its history. Over the decades, more than 1,000 people have been investigated as possible suspects in D.B. Cooper case. Some were attention seekers, others were convicted criminals, and a few had backgrounds that raised real suspicion. One of the most discussed suspects was Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Green Beret and experienced skydiver. In 1972, just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy carried out a nearly identical plane hijacking, demanding $500,000 and parachuting from a Boeing 727. He was caught and sentenced to 45 years in prison, but later escaped and was killed in a shootout with police. While some believe McCoy was Cooper, the FBI pointed to differences in appearance and behavior, and surviving crew members did not recognize him. Another widely discussed suspect was Dwayne Weber, who allegedly confessed on his deathbed in 1995, telling his wife, "I am Dan Cooper." After his death, she found old Northwest Airlines papers and a diary with notes in French, details that seemed suspicious. But no fingerprints, DNA, or hard evidence ever linked Weber to the hijacking. Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam veteran and explosives expert, became another high-profile suspect. In the 2010s, amateur investigators claimed they had cracked hidden codes in letters sent to the FBI and pointed to Rackstraw as Cooper. Rackstraw repeatedly denied any connection, even joking in interviews, "I'm afraid of heights." Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper and Northwest Orient employee, was another contender. He resembled the Cooper sketches, had a quiet personality, and left behind a surprising amount of money when he died. Yet once again, no firm evidence ever tied him to the hijacking. Despite the countless tips, books, and theory, none of the suspects have been proven to be D.B. Cooper. More than 50 years later, the same questions remain. Who was the man in the dark suit and sunglasses? Did he survive the jump? And where is the missing money? Perhaps the most enduring part of the D.B. Cooper story is that after all this time he remains, just as he wanted, a mystery.
Cabin attendants, all doors and park bitte.